Ed, this is Alex. How are you?
Not bad. Keeping busy, that's for sure.
I want to say let's begin at the beginning, but I think there are a number of beginnings. Um, let's talk about first. Grid is a sustainability magazine. Let's begin with why is it necessary to have green burials? What are the materials that are being used that are harmful to the environment, and how does your services differ?
So when you have a green burial facility, that means no embalming, no concrete vaults, no polished monuments upright, set in concrete. Typically, the property would be deed restricted to not only protect the consumer, but to ensure that the property stays a natural burial ground, in perpetuity forever. And and by going back naturally, the environmental benefits are wonderful. The emotional benefits to families who are physically able to be a participant, that's the real definition. We'll get into that in a bit. But so we have no toxic embalming fluids going into the ground, no carbon footprint from the creation of concrete, only biodegradable burial containers. So no steel or hardwood caskets, that could be depleting our natural resources and creating a carbon footprint. So it's really about basically going back the way we came, and allowing our family members to take care of us the way they have, for basically the inception of time, for all intents and purposes. So it's amazing to know I'm the president of an organization called the Green Burial Council, which is like a standard setter for the industry, for our industry, our movement. And it's amazing to know the natural resources that are actually used in the traditional funeral industry. I think it was something to the effect that every year 8 Olympic-sized swimming pools could be filled with the embalming fluid, that go into the deceased. Enough concrete could be laid from Chicago to the Golden Gate Bridge, for a road, for the amount of concrete vaults and things like that. It just goes on and on. So that, it really makes a lot of sense. And it also not only helps the environment, but it's much more affordable for the family, and you can be buried in your favorite Afghan. The family can create their own pine box or whatever type of burial container they would like to create. And the other thing too is, just so talking about sustainability in the environment, cremation now is an enormous factor in the funeral industry itself. And the driving factor behind cremation for many years, really, believe it or not, was affordability. Funerals are not cheap, and you can have a direct cremation for as little as about $700, believe it or not. The problem with cremation is it takes out, any type of tradition or ceremony or things like that. It's kind of like a removed process. But the reason I mentioned it is we also have cremation options. And you might say to me, geez, that sounds funny. Why would you have an option for cremated remains when it's something that, doesn't really fall into your wheelhouse? And the reason being is that you're never going to stop cremation. You're never going to convince people to not do cremation. So what we say is, why not create a better place and a better environment for the actual remains that the family has after the cremation process? Meaning that, for instance, we have a thing called Tree of Life, where you inter cremated remains and you plant a tree. What we've said is, let's say, for instance, a white oak tree that could live for 500 years. What would the carbon offset of that individual tree be to the carbon footprint that the cremation and not only that, the entire life that was lived created? I believe that the offset would outweigh enormously the footprint. And the reason I mention that is, there are millions upon millions of cremated remains that exist, and environmentally, if we can create programs larger than just an individual tree, reforestation programs on a larger level, where you're not just a particular tree, but you're part of an ecosystem, I believe that we can really make an environmental impact. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's important.
I spent a lot of time on in a graveyard in a cemetery when I was younger. My grandfather was a caretaker at a cemetery in Northeast Pennsylvania. So, and even now when I go for a run, I run in a cemetery, and um, uh, the thoughts that I have had as an adult are when you talk about sustainability, it's like, how can you have a marker for everyone who lives? Like, I have seen now the difference between what the cemetery looked like when I was 5, and now I'm going to be 50.
Right.
And open lots are now filled with tombstones. And it just seems like we have this block that we can continue to mark every life that lives in that way. And that to me, as a land proposition, is not sustainable.
I completely agree with you, and it's good that you have that experience, because you'll understand what I'll have to say concerning cemeteries and our spin on it and the way we've developed ours. I wasn't a cemeterian by choice. It was something that chose me. So I had a very different perspective when I got into this business. I was probably no different than you. I'm a consumer. I think about what would the consumer want, and and not only what would they want, how does that make them feel? And in my personal opinion, I thought to myself, cemeteries are so peaceful, so serene, they can be so beautiful. Why not create these spaces as a recreational green space for the living? Ironically, that's what they used to be. But our society has become so, because of horror movies and ridiculous things like that, so removed from the process of death, that they think of these places as scary or spooky places, when they are places that should be held up as community pillars. And like you said, it's not necessary to memorialize every individual person with some sort of giant granite stone. But if you could become part of a forest, think of the living legacy that you leave for the others, your family, generations, the stewardship. I mean, I think that should be enough. And I believe that a lot of my customers feel the same way, that it's not so much the place, it's not so much the actual individual space or spot to visit, it's the entire property itself. And I know that because when I see all my families, they are there enjoying the property. They're not mourning by a graveside. They are walking, they're walking the trails, and they have big smiles on their faces, and they're loving it, and I think that's a pretty special feeling to be able to take a cemetery and have it not feel like what we believe a cemetery feels like. Like, people don't even think of that when they're there. Their minds aren't even focused. The birds are singing. They're surrounded by life. And what I always say to people are that this is the final statement in one's life and how they chose to live it. But the living are what's left behind. So to be able to celebrate one's life that was lived in this way, to be an active participant and be part of that process, and allow yourself to gain a greater acceptance of the passing, celebrate the life that was lived, and make it feel like a true happy place instead of a place that feels sad. I mean, if we're all going to be grief stricken when our loved ones pass, but it's like taxes. We understand that we can't avoid it, right? So instead of avoiding it, why not embrace it and know that you can leave this living legacy behind for your family members. And when they think of you, they can rejoice in the fact that they're in a place of such beauty and knowing that it's actually making a difference. So I think if we can get, and my consumers understand that 100%. That's the irony of the situation. They understand it without even knowing they understand it, because it's not something they've thought of so deeply. But it's the funeral industry itself that we have to change. Not that they don't accept it, because they do. But these guys are in business for a reason, to make money and to keep the lights on. We got it. Of course they help families. I don't take that away from them for a second. But we need to reinvent the way we treat our dead, and embrace the funeral director and the cemeteries in teaching them the new way, so that they can find a way to make a living doing it and want to offer the services themselves. So that's really important, because I will tell you this: I have not found a funeral director who has come to any of my facilities who, and I'm saying this for the first time they've ever come, of course they've come and they don't know what to expect, but when they leave, they have fallen in love with it. And I say them time and time again. It's not the last time I say them. It's something that they say to themselves, wow, I want to offer this to my families. So that's good. They will absolutely embrace it. They just need to understand it and feel it. And the one thing I was thinking of as I was just speaking was that this is the one thing that's kind of unique about natural burial. You know, the modern day funeral industry has made our families feel as if they can't handle the undertaking of someone's passing. Now, don't get me wrong, taking care of someone in death is not an easy task. And I do believe that the funeral director can certainly lighten the load and make things much more memorable for a family, because in death, some things can happen, obviously, that could be not so memorable. So they serve a purpose. But meaning that family members, when they first come to me, almost believe they can't handle it. They can't do it. They don't know what they're going to do. But this is what I tell people. I say, in your DNA, believe it or not, it is in you. It is in your DNA to care for your dead, to care for the dead itself. No one knows it until they experience it and are part of it. They come in scared and apprehensive, and they leave with smiles on their faces, empowered, realizing that as they start to become part of the process, the fears wash away. And the next thing you know, they're doing all these things without even direction or without even realizing that they're doing it. And I think they're in amazement when they're done that, holy cow, I just did all that and no one even had to tell me how to do it. I just want to make that point. It's really true. It's in all of us. So it's important to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, part of the part of the dark side of industrialization and progress in the 20th century is that we forgot how to do very basic things. And you can be talking about food or, fixing things, with everything being disposable. But then also what you're talking about, something that human beings have done for as long as there have been human beings.
Right.
Presumably.
Absolutely. There's no doubt that this movement is growing. I can tell you because I've been in it since 2007. And I remember back then that my typical customer, this is my cemetery in South Jersey now. This is where I act, where I'm from. I have a cemetery in Cape May County called Steelmantown. And I got involved for family reasons. It had been a family cemetery. My family came here in 1680 and had a king's grant of 195,000 acres. So we create from modern day Atlantic City out, we created all kinds of villages that surrounded the industry at the time. And that became my family cemetery from 1700 until 1840, when my family gave it to the township we live in to allow the interment of the dead. And my brother got buried there and all my loved ones got buried there until 1957, when the township sold it to a funeral director who ironically bought it, believe it or not, for what's called simple burial, which is green burial. But for him, he had gotten a contract from the Woodbine Developmental Center, and he was partly doing a good deed. That cemetery had never required embalming or concrete vaults, and it was very rural, so it never established that, and it never had them. So for Jack, it was the perfect place to put the boys, but at the same time, it fell into neglect. So I actually got into this business not because I wanted to be a cemeterian. It was because it always bothered my mother, the condition of the cemetery, because my brother was there. Mm-hmm. So when I went to speak to that individual, I asked him to clean it up, and he was 87 years old, and he knew me my whole life. And he said, hey, Eddie, I don't have the money or the means. How about I give you the cemetery? Well, I was a real estate broker and a builder. What am I going to do with the cemetery, right? But at the same time, I felt like somebody needed to be responsible. So I took possession of the cemetery for $1. Jack was a meticulous bookkeeper. So there's a thing called a certificate of authority. That's the legal right to run a cemetery. Jack had kept that in good standing, even though he was not burying people. And I cleaned it up, 20 dump truck loads of debris. And, it was really a mess. And at that point in time, but not knowing anything about green burial or the cemetery business itself, I owned a cemetery in the middle of the Pine Barrens. And I said to myself, what should I do with this place? Never thinking about it being a money-making proposition. It was more about respecting my loved ones and bringing the community out to enjoy the property. So I installed probably about a mile of trails for people to come out and walk. This was before I ever knew anything about natural burial or anything else. And then one morning I was having coffee about 6 months after I took the cemetery, and I read an article about natural burial in the Atlantic City Press, and it basically had like 5 prerequisites. And unbelievably, it was like the stars had aligned. My cemetery met all those prerequisites. And some of the things were never practice traditional burial, be adjacent to or part of a state agency or state park. I was adjacent to the 25,000 acre Belleplain State Forest. Uh, so the stars aligned, and I found myself with something right here in southern New Jersey that, people would never have dreamed could have existed. And
Mhm.
and what happened was, in the very beginning, my clientele, that were coming to me were coming from like New York City and in the Philadelphia area, and they tended to be at that time highly educated individuals who were looking for an alternative, who kind of knew what they wanted. Uh, and for probably 3 or 4 years, I dealt with mainly those types of people until more and more people experienced it, and then more everyday people who maybe they weren't staunch environmentalists, but maybe they did just believe in the environment, or they just didn't want to be embalmed or in a concrete vault. They started to come to me as well, and every year, unfortunately, the best advertisement is a funeral. And the reason I say that is because they can actually come and experience it. And they come and they stand in the middle of a forest and they say, what the hell am I doing out here in the middle of the woods? And as it unfolds, then it all tells the story. I mean, they can load their loved one on the wagon. They can bring the wagon back. They can carry them, place them on the gravesite. They can lower them down. They can backfill the grave. And during this entire process, they're surrounded by the life and living, the wind blowing through the trees, the birds whistling in the forest, and you can see the grief disappear. Typically they're very grief stricken in the beginning, and then they run the gamut of emotions. It can be anger, laughter, sadness, and at the end, when they're finally done, they look at you and they give you a genuine smile and they say thank you. And it's a surreal experience in the sense that there's not a tear in the group when the process is over with. Everyone has found that greater form of acceptance. So I know that's what's going to help this movement grow. And I believe that, who couldn't embrace saving the world? The one point I'd like to make is that, and you know this yourself, especially with this magazine, this pandemic has taught us a very, very valuable lesson. As horrible as it has been, it's been a real epiphany. In that short period of time when individuals were sitting at home, not driving their vehicles, the earth was healing itself so quickly. In the Himalayas, there was a town that hadn't seen the Himalayas in 30 years. The smog had lifted. There was a clear view of the Himalayas. In Venice, the canals were crystal clear. It's not too late. We all know this. The earth is an incredible place. And, I think we all have a responsibility, as an individual and as a human being to pitch in any way we can. So I see great things coming out of a lot of stuff. As horrible as this tragedy has been, I think it's changing the way we are. I hope, anyway.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's been a profound break that's allowed us to reevaluate how we're living, and even just the importance of the outdoor space. When you're confined, when you're locked down, getting back into nature, it's critical. So I feel like that will continue to inform how people live and think about things. I did want to actually ask though about the markers. I saw either on the site or with an interview with you. You pick rocks. Is there here lies Alex Mulcahy, 1970 to 2020, or?
It can be. This is what we do for our families. When you purchase a plot at any one of our facilities, you receive a natural field stone, something that's indigenous to the area, free of charge. And that can be used as a grave marker if a family desires. Some people decide to, some people don't. Some people decide to plant a tree. They can be engraved. They just can't be set in concrete, and they can't be polished. They can be painted as well. And the beauty of that is it's nondescript in the sense that you can walk the trails and you can walk right by it, and it's not something that jumps out at you. It looks like it's part of the landscape, and gravity over time will take it back. It came from the earth, it goes back to the earth. We find that not only does the family appreciate the fact that they're able to get something like that without another major expense to them, during their time of need, but at the actual ceremony itself, that it comes full circle, that the family themselves can take that stone and place it together and know that they've completed the entire task, and they don't have to come back in 30 days for a concrete footing and then, try to order a stone. So to answer your question, we allow it. And I would say probably 95% of the people do actually choose a stone. They do want to have something. And you would think that sometimes people would just want to pick enormous things, like where's the biggest stone that you got? And that's really not the case at all. People typically choose much smaller than you would ever anticipate. And they're perfectly good with that. And like I said, some people prefer to plant something. They might want a tree in memorial opposed to a stone. So yeah, that's how we handle memorialization.
I wonder too about the trends nationally about going to cemeteries. Like, I feel like people don't visit them as much as they used to. But that's just anecdotal, or just what I observe. And I wonder if you're serving New York and Philly, it's a little bit of a drive to get to where you are. Do people return?
That's the absolute beauty of what we do. Not only do they return, but they make it a regular place that they visit. And that's what I love about what we do. I will tell you that a lot of traditional services, because you are so far removed from the process, it's not a good feeling. They didn't really feel good when they were at the cemetery itself. And no one wants to return to bad feelings. They don't want to go back to a place that made them feel bad. Making the families feel good, empowering them, surrounding them by the nature, giving them a recreational an output, where they can not only go and visit their loved one, but be able to walk the trails and enjoy maybe spring or summer or winter. It's bringing people back to the cemetery, and the recreational part. This is what's really important to know. You see a lot of old cemeteries and you never see a soul in them. And you'll say to yourself, except for the occasional people that like to look at historical stones, there's a reason for that. Because families, when someone passes away in the first 1 to 3 years, of course, they visit quite often. The next 5 to 10, it's less frequent. 10 to 20, some of the individuals themselves have passed away. 20 to 30, there may be no one alive, or very few people alive that even knew anybody. And then as that progression goes on for 100 years, pretty soon, there's not anyone alive that knows anybody in the cemetery, and they don't really have a reason to go. So if you make a community green space and give the community a reason to go to the property, to throw frisbee, to walk the trails, to ride their mountain bikes, you're bringing the living there on a daily basis. It really is important. Then you're exposing that property to new people who would love it so much that they're going to say, you know what, I enjoyed that my entire life. It was one of my favorite places to visit. That's where I want to be. So we're giving life back to the actual cemetery itself. And I wanted to make that point. It's really a shame, but it's true. People are scarred a lot of times by deaths, and they remember things like being at the cemetery and how cold, and the coffin on the lowering device, and it doesn't feel good. It really truly doesn't. And I don't need to ask you, because I know the answer. If something made you feel incredibly bad, you probably would not want to go back and revisit it. So that's a point that people need to understand.
Well, yeah, and I think too, the setting that you're offering is a life affirming one. It is death and life in nature. It's happening all the time. And but when you go to a traditional cemetery, it's like it's sort of like a city of the dead, or 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 a mall. It's just like it's. I mean, my
Right.
grandfather's cemetery he planted quite a few trees, but like in general, it's like there's a lot of exposed open area. And yeah, I mean, I would imagine, I'd like to come to your cemetery sometime. But I would imagine that the experience is you're not overwhelmed by, you're not encircled by these monuments of death.
Right. And you want to know something interesting about that. And you're absolutely right. But a couple of years ago, when I started to go out to California, and the reason I went to California was I was burying so many people from California and all over the country in Steelmantown. And it made no logical sense. But now I know why, because there was no facilities that were quite like what we were doing. So I realized, though, I said the low hanging fruit is what's called a hybrid model. The traditional cemetery that could allow natural burial in its setting, but didn't, because they required concrete vaults or unnecessary things. And that kind of agitated me, in the sense that I thought to myself, how dare they say you have to have these things, and then people are denied being buried with their loved ones because they don't believe in it. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to take a traditional cemetery and I'm going to create a hybrid cemetery out of it. And I'm going to teach people how to use that as a green space and not feel like what you just said, being overwhelmed with all the stones. Instead, looking at the stones, admiring the beauty, and knowing that these are your forefathers and the history that lies within, and then try to create something more like a beautiful arboretum. So what I did was I acquired a cemetery in Portland, Oregon, the oldest cemetery in the city. It's actually in the city limits. It's called Columbian. It's from 1848. And I mean, there's all kinds of Oregon Trail pioneers buried there and everything else. And it had these beautiful trees, giant, like I said, an arboretum of sorts. And it was in the middle of an industrial area. I mean, you would have driven by it and never known it was there. And that's because over time, as we know, cemeteries seem to get pushed out into these obscure spots that aren't typically surrounded by homes, but in the urban setting, more or less industry. And the reason I tell you all this is we had a community about a mile down the street who didn't even realize the cemetery was there. And that community really lacked any kind of green recreational space. So we went in, we cleaned it up, and we invited the community back. We created a natural burial section. And then we had what we called our harvest festival. And we invited the community to come there and set up shop around our horseshoe driveway. It's a large property. It's about 10 acres with 7,000 plus burials. So you can imagine all the stones. And the individuals, we had 39 vendors. Nobody was there in the funeral industry, like they were there as the community, as vendors. And then we had about 5 or 6 different presentations during the day away from that people could come understand, learn about natural burial. And it was an unbelievable success. And the reason I tell you is that now the community comes there. And again, like I said, they may bring their child there with a wiffle ball bat and a wiffle ball or a Frisbee, or walk their dogs. And I think we can even change the negative connotation around the larger cemeteries that do feel like this, giant expanse of the dead, of monumentation and nothing more. And what I wanted to tell you is, what we've learned to do in our hybrid models is we've created spaces that, for instance, in the historical areas, they're over 100 years old. No one knows anyone living, there's no one alive that knows anyone there. So we've said, why allow ourselves to continue to spend all the money on mowing and maintenance and things like that? Why not create a savanna or a butterfly garden scenario where we allow the native grasses to come in, the native flowers. We put trails in that during the summer months. And then in the winter, we cut it all down again. We mow it down so that you don't have any saplings or anything like that come in, and allow it to grow up again. But wonderful, wonderful way to surround, respect the dead there by surrounding them with the living and repurposing that area as well, and it's not a matter of disrespect. It's actually the highest form of compliment, in my opinion, to actually bring the living back to a section where they otherwise wouldn't even go. So there's all kinds of different ways and ideas that I think we can help the, communities across the country to embrace their spaces, whether it be a natural space or even a very, a very traditional space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's room for both, and I mean that's again the idea of sustainability, the maintenance in perpetuity of a stone and the area around it. That just seems, it does not seem sustainable.
No, it's absolutely not, and I'll tell you why. And this is another thing that's really important for the consumer and for the funeral industry to understand. The reason you ride by defunct cemeteries, cemeteries that you say, geez, look at that. Why doesn't somebody clean it up? That's awful. It's because in modern history, we created cemetery boards. Around 1970, most states instituted cemetery boards that would make sure that there was a trust fund that would be available for maintenance of the cemetery itself. Unfortunately, that came along so late that most cemeteries were already full. All the money that they had made was already spent. And of course, there was no money to maintain them anymore. So the beauty of a natural burial cemetery is the maintenance is so minimal that, first of all, you should, of course, put money aside. We put 30% of all of our sales into a perpetual maintenance fund. But the maintenance is so minimal that, if I spend $500 a year in Steelmantown, and this is absolutely no lie, this is a 12-acre cemetery. If I spent $500 a year, that would be a lot. I don't think I spend $100 a year, and I'll tell you why. We only mow our historical section once a year. That's our meadow. We allow it to be a meadow. We blow our trails off once a week. Other than that, if a tree falls down, you don't remove it. You cut it up and you take it into the forest. You allow it to go back to nature the way it came. It's amazing what you can do and how beautiful it can be. And you're not only not putting all the, the irrigated water on lawns and mowing and gas and all the things. It just becomes so much better of a business model. And also for sustainability purposes, if you have, for instance, $100,000 in that perpetual maintenance account that the state requires you to have, and you're paying $100 or $500 a year, chances are, even when it's full, you will never run out of money to maintain that property, ever. Where opposed to when every year the cost of grass cutting goes up, machinery goes up, gasoline goes up, you can't keep up to the pace of it. And eventually when your cemetery runs out of sellable space, it's just a matter of time before it runs out of money. It never lasts forever, never. So another reason for all cemeterians to look at this and say, this is the way to be sure, because we have a responsibility to our families in the industry, that these places are protected forever, whatever their purpose may be. It's not just, okay, 100 years from now, we can just, build a big building on this or something. It's a cemetery forever. So we've got a responsibility.
I'm curious. So how long have you been in the cemetery business? I've been in the cemetery business since 2007. And you were a developer prior to that?
Yeah, I was my first business that I owned was a landscape company, and I had that for 15 years. So that probably helped me out a lot with understanding how to maintain or take care of properties.
Sure.
For 25 years, I was a real estate broker and a developer as well. And I just retired this past year from both. I now only do my cemetery work. And that's mainly because it's my passion. I don't have the passion for the building and things like that anymore, like I do the cemeteries.
Did what you learned about cemeteries influence any of your development, like as far as sustainability?
Well, it's kind of funny. I always developed on the side of sustainability and didn't even realize I was doing it. Growing up in the Pine Barrens, growing up in the forest, I am a tree hugger in a lot of senses. I hate to take things like that down because I understand how long it takes for it to grow and the importance of it. So I was doing a lot of things like that and probably not even realizing I was doing it. I don't think I really knew what kind of person I was I wouldn't call myself an environmentalist, but I am. I guess that's the only way I can say that. You know, it was never something where I would have gotten into an in-depth conversation about, you know, saving the world with anybody. I just kind of know what I feel like is right, and I've always followed what I felt like was right. So it's kind of just an irony, I guess, that you know, I was doing a lot of the things that that I thought was right, and they were leaning towards sustainability, environmentalism, and I just didn't realize I was doing it.
Right.
There's very few. Like, I'm the only natural burial preserve in the entire state of New Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't think you would ever see another one, because cemeteries are very cost prohibitive to create. So, and it takes a lifetime to take back that investment money if you have to buy the land, develop the land. So it's not a very good business model, is what I'm saying. That's why I've told people to embrace the historical cemeteries and repurpose them, because we have so many of them that exist. So I'm the only one in New Jersey. You have a couple in Pennsylvania. You got one called Penn Forest out near Pittsburgh. That is a natural burial ground. And then there's a few hybrids in Pennsylvania. Probably the closest one to Philadelphia would be in Lancaster. But it's a Mennonite one in Lancaster. And then I think there's one in Harrisburg as well. And then, and now I have mine up here. My hybrid model is up here in Mount Pocono. So those would be the three closest to Philadelphia. And then New Jersey has one other natural burial cemetery, and it's part of the Newark Diocese. The Catholic Church created a small meadow section up in Newark, but it's very small, you know, but they do offer natural burial services there as well.
Bringing up the Catholic faith, they require that you are buried in a vault. Is that correct?
Not anymore. You know, this is what's happened, and you know, I'm glad I can tell you these things. Yes, years ago, that's what they would have said. Now, because their parishioners, their followers are saying to the Catholic Church and other religions as well that we want this option, they can't ignore it anymore. And the Catholic Church itself has actually started to embrace the concept. And there are probably a half dozen natural burial grounds in this country that belong to Catholic dioceses. So they are starting to embrace the concept. And you know, this is the interesting thing about what I do. Because of what we do and how different it is, I probably have had the distinct pleasure of serving every possible religion, sexuality, whatever it is, you name it, every walk of life, we have seen it. And that's a beautiful thing, because that's given us a lot of perspective on things. And what we have found is that, you know, for instance, like the Catholic Church, now the Catholic Church in Southern New Jersey is very, they're very accepting of what their parishioners want. And they actually will come out and consecrate the gravesite and come out and perform Catholic services. I have a Catholic priest in Marmora, which is outside of Ocean City. His name is Monsignor Joyce. He has actually come out and officiated over non-Catholic funerals for families. He believes in it so much. Comes out in plain clothes. I've got a huge Jewish and Muslim following as well, mainly because obviously our practice of natural burial is exactly what they've always done. Jewish and Muslim is natural burial. But the funny thing about that is, you know, typically they would want their own section. They wouldn't want to be out amongst others that aren't of their religion. But that has went out the window. So when it's come down to it, no matter what somebody's believed in, this has overridden it. They feel that they accept it, that this is good for them. They haven't changed their religious belief. They just believe, why would my religion not believe in what this is? So it's amazing. I mean, like I said, I had a large Jewish congregation in Dover, Delaware, that I've buried 8 of their parishioners, and they have their own cemetery. And when they came to my cemetery for their very first burial, and they have like ultra Orthodox, and they have different levels of a cemetery, so it's pretty stringent. The one gentleman came up to us, and he said, he was part of the part of the religious order. He said, we don't like this, and we don't agree with it. And he was like mad. And we like, what we don't take any offense. We're like, hey, whatever. 3 or 4 burials in, he came and gave all my workers yarmulkes. He loved what we did. And he's like, here, wear these when you do our funerals. And, we're not Jewish, but, it was just funny how that happened. And then we actually just had, believe it or not, last year, we had a Hasidic burial, which is like absolutely unheard of, but that's what the person wanted. And we were able to do it. So we've seen it all, man. We've seen it all. And what we have found is the initial gut reaction from the congregation is they may say to them, we're not going to agree with this. But at the end of the day, when the whole entire family says this is what we want, they don't turn their back on them. They come out and they do it.
Yep.
So
what is it about the act of the burial that's so healing for people? What is it that that resonates so deeply?
I think to be able to be an active participant, to actually give the gift of your actual physical participation in one's final act, like the final act of let me see how to put this, that final act of kindness. I know I've probably said that earlier, for the family to be able to carry their loved one, place them on the gravesite, lower them down, to know that they still belong to them, that like to care for them like they cared for them while they were living. I used an infant as an example all the time. If you have a child, a baby, you care for, you bathe them, you feed them, you clothe them, you do everything you can for them because you have to. In death, you should still be able to care for your loved one in a way that feels like they belong to you and that you haven't lost the right to them. In modern funeral industry, when they get whisked away to the funeral home, people feel like in a state of despair, that they've lost that individual and they have no rights to them anymore. You have all full rights to your loved ones, and you should be able to care for them in that way. That final act of kindness heals the heart. It's so cathartic for that family. They don't have that missing feeling anymore. That, that the minute they stop breathing, that they've lost all touch to that person. To lay them to rest in that way is life-changing. And there's not a person who's ever attended a funeral at my cemetery, and I can say this confidently, that didn't feel that way. That after they experienced it, said, this is the way it always should be. Even if they chose a traditional funeral, to still have their family be able to care for them and be part of certain ritual or part of the process that the industry doesn't allow them to be part of. To see that casket on that lowering device and have a funeral director say, okay, 9:00 we're going to be here, 9:30 we're going to be there. There's no time constraint. It's all on the family's time. It unfolds naturally. And when they're ready for that final act, they're ready. And they do it feeling good. They can lower them down and backfill that grave and know that they were there for them. There's no other feeling like it. So that's probably the best way I can sum it up.
And how has in our society, we push away death as much as we can. Like we don't want to interact with it, or we think we don't want to interact with it. How has your life changed now that death and grieving are really at the center of what you do?
You know what? I don't feel that way at all. That's what's kind of funny about it. A lot of people will say to me, geez, I don't know how you do it. Every individual experience is a journey with my family. You get to intimately help them in probably the toughest time of their life. To know that you're there for an individual that you don't even know, and you can care for them in a way that you've changed their life for the better. There's no better feeling. So when I get that call for a funeral, I don't feel odd. I feel like it's like a blessing that's been given to me that I can help another person through that tough time. And the best part about the conversation is that when they speak to you, apparently something resonates with them, that they say to you, geez, I feel so much better after talking to you. Like like they don't feel like they're getting a line or a canned speech. They feel like somebody actually cares, no matter who that may be. And for me, I don't feel like I'm surrounded by death. I feel like I'm surrounded by life and new life. I'm helping create new life, and I'm giving hope to those who were lost in despair. So I think it's a blessing. I love it. I mean, I love every day of it, and I love to teach people. I love to teach people that feeling because it's life changing. And my kids are part of the, my children. I have two daughters who are 13 and 16. They're starting to get into some of this business with me, and it doesn't feel bad. I guess that's the best way to put it. It doesn't feel bad at all.
Mhm. Cool. Well, Ed, thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure talking with you. And I have your email, so I will follow up if I have any other questions. Is there anything else? I feel like we hit a lot of stuff. Is there anything you feel like we missed?
No, I don't believe so at all. I think the biggest thing we need to do is we need to encourage not only the funeral industry, but our families to take a harder look at this option. And we need to empower communities in creating these spaces. Whether it be new or a historical cemetery, we have the power. We hold the power of change. And I've never been a guy that could say to himself that, well, it's you always got to be that lone voice, right? I remember 13 years ago when I got into this industry, I used to go and I used to try to teach people. And again, who the hell am I to teach somebody? I'm teaching them something that just should be basic, part of knowledge in their brain. But I was like, I was talking to a room full of people who weren't listening. Now I'm talking to a full house and everybody's listening. Change isn't always easy, but if you don't try, it's never going to happen. Yep. So we got to step up. And if I can help empower people and inspire them, I would like to do so. And then I would like to be able to teach those people so they can inspire others as well. I think that's the important part.
Sounds like a good plan.
All right, Alex, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed. I'll let you know if I need anything else, and when I do this, I'll make sure you get copies.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. All right, bye now.
You too. Take care.
Bye.